Dear participants of the Youth Summit 2015, first of all, I would like to thank you for inviting me for elaborating on the issues of global development and global challenges for the 21st century. And I want really to congratulate you that you have been organizing this very important event, because you are the next generation of leaders and responsible actors to shape globalization. And I'm proud to be with you here. I would like to congratulate that you are pushing forward these global debates. And I wanted to argue in this following lecture that you will be the driving forces of the 21st century towards global sustainable development. I have been cooperating with your organization already with my institute in 2011 when Fukushima occurred. And we had together a joint conference and a joint workshop with young people together with your organization to think about future activities towards sustainable development. So what I would like to do now during the next 10 minutes is to elaborate and reflect on 10 points which I receive as very important and which I would like to suggest to discuss during your conference. So my first point which I wanted to emphasize is that we need to understand what has been pushing forward these global interdependencies which we now have to shape and which we now have to push forward towards sustainable development. And I see four basic drivers, four basic global waves of change, which we all need to understand and which I would like you to reflect on. The first big wave of change is the driving forces of economic globalization. Economic globalization has transformed all our national economies, and global economic governance is therefore a very important issue. And it is still an unsolved challenge, because we have been seeing the financial crisis only a few years ago, and the global economic governance framework is needed. So economic globalization is the first big challenge and the first big wave of global change. There is a second big wave of global change in parallel to the first one. And this global change has to do with power shifts in the global economy and therefore also in the international system. It is about China, it is about Brazil, it is about India, it is about Nigeria. Power shifts are going on. We are moving towards a post-Western global world order, and we need to understand that when we talk about global governance and how to shape the global order, we are now confronted with an emerging post-Western world order, and we have to discuss this kind of issue. There is a third very important wave of global change, and this change has to do with climate change dynamics and the dynamics of shifting patterns of the Earth system itself. So it is about the relationship between people, social systems, the economy, and the Earth system. You all know about the climate change impacts and the challenges of climate change. This is changing radically the way how we think about development, because for the first time in the history of human mankind, we as human beings are able to shift the patterns of the Earth system itself. So we are the drivers of the Earth system. Specialists talk about a new era of the Earth system, the Anthropocene. And the Anthropocene implies that we need to take responsibility for stabilizing the Earth system for many, many generations to come. There is a fourth wave of global change in parallel to the first three ones which are already mentioned, and this is about digitalization. Digitalization is a wonderful innovation on the one hand side, because it provides a global information platform where we can create virtual networks to communicate with people around the world. So this is actually what we need, because we need to learn together to shape globalization processes, and therefore this communication infrastructure is very important. But this is also linked to challenges, because digitalization implies impacts on how we think about privacy, how we think about public and private rules and norms and values, and how we protect democracy for strong actors which might manipulate digital worlds. So this is the fourth big driver of global change, and we need to understand this background and discuss this background and what this implies for developing our national economies and societies and the global system as such. This has been my first point. So this is what is driving globalization. My second point is that behind this background, we all, and you, need to learn to manage the global interdependencies which are emerging in the context of these 4 waves of global change. What we need is more people with a global perspective. What we need is a new generation of world citizens. And your conference is a very interesting example for this kind of emerging global citizenship, because you are coming together as young generation, as future leaders of our global system, and you are bringing together people from around the world, from very different countries with different backgrounds and different cultures. So how we build a global citizenship and a world citizenship is something which you need to solve. My third point is that there are interesting trends where progress can be observed. When it comes to poverty reduction, when it comes to access of people around the world to education, to water, to basic health infrastructure, even to better governance systems, we have been making progress during the last 2 to 3 decades. To mention only the most important point, 50% of global population has been living in situations of absolute poverty in 1980. Today we are talking about 15 to 25% in this segment. So the part of the population living under very bad conditions is shrinking, and many countries are moving from a socioeconomic perspective into the right direction. Of course, poverty is still a challenge. This is unfinished business. But there is progress which we need to emphasize and which we need to consider. My fourth point is that I see major challenges. I talked about progress at national levels. I see major challenges in the field of what we call the global commons. The 21st century will be the century of the global commons. This is about the oceans, the atmosphere, the climate system, biodiversity. The Earth system as such is our biggest human common good. And on the other hand, it is about a stable financial international system. This is also a common good. It is about how we manage global data flows in the 21st century. This will also become a global common good. So how we manage and how we understand global common goods as a very important challenge for all of us organizing global international cooperation processes is one of the big topics. We are making progress in many countries on local and national levels, but we fail until now to manage the global commons. So this is something which my generation and then your generation need to focus on strongly. So based on what I reflected on, the global commons, the fifth point is that we need to build in this century, and this is a very important task for your generation, but also, of course, in the responsibility of my generation, we need to build a culture of global cooperation. This is not easy to realize because, as you know, the interaction between nation states during the last 200, 250 years in the era of the nation state has been dominated by hegemony, the power plays between big states, the domination of a group of countries over other countries. So this is what we need to overcome. And global cooperation culture is about identities, global citizenship, reciprocity when we work together, not domination. And this is something which has to do with a changing concept of working together in global contexts. It's interesting that the idea as such is not new. Immanuel Kant, a German philosopher, already thought about global cooperation cultures in the 17th century. In 1795, he wrote a book about the perpetual peace in the international arenas. He coined the term global citizenship. So the idea is not new, but implement it is very difficult. This is a generational challenge. It's your challenge. So my sixth point, build on the already mentioned issues. It is about the ecological dimension of global development. All the data which we do have on our tables now, what science is telling us, results in the conclusion that around 2070, so in one generation, at the end of your generation actually, we need to reduce global emissions of greenhouse gases to 0, And we need to use resources, all the resources which we implement and use in our industrial processes in circles. So it is about a zero resource and a zero emission global economy which we need to build. And this implies that we need to think about wealth concepts which are compatible with such a zero emission and zero resource global economy. This has to do with social innovations, the way we define wealth. This has to do with our consumption patterns and responsibility as citizens and consumers, and the way we consume. And of course, this has also to do with technological innovations to improve production processes towards a zero carbon world and a zero resource world, a circular economy in 2017. So point number 7, which I would like to emphasize very briefly, the phenomenon of new global middle classes. You know that the global society is changing, and you belong to the global middle classes. All the people in your room, in your conference now, belong to the global middle classes. The global middle class has been changing radically during the last decades. Global middle class people are people with an income per capita per year, netto to say so, what you really can invest in your consumption patterns, with an income between $4,000 and $40,000 per year. In 1990, after the fall of the wall, we had 1.3 billion people belonging to the global middle classes. And 80% of these people have been living in the Western world. Only 20% have been living in the non-Western world. Today, we have already 2.5 billion people belonging to this social group. And 50% of those are now living already in non-Western countries, and only 50% in the OECD world. And in 2030, this is not so far away. In 2030, we will have around 5 billion people belonging to the global middle classes. 80% of those will be living in non-Western countries. Only 20% will be living in the Western countries, in the Western world. This is a radical change. And I would like to mention 2 issues which you should reflect on. The first point is that we need to build bridges between the Western and the non-Western global middle classes during the next generation, during your generation. This will be very important, because when we think about creating a global culture of cooperation, how these global new middle classes are working together from very different countries, from very different cultures, from Western and non-Western countries, this will be crucial. And there is a second point. You belong to the global middle classes. Please don't forget the bottom 2 billion people. So people living in very difficult situations of life, of organizing their families, of organizing their informal activities in the economy. We need to build strategies for those people to improve social conditions around the world. This is about justice. And you need to define, as people belonging to the global middle classes, from the Western world and from the non-Western world, we need to define our social responsibilities for the 2 bottom billion in the global economy. So my point number 8 is about a very important global trend which we can observe around the world. It is about the global urbanization shift. Currently, 50% of global population is living in urban areas. In 2050, 80 to 85% of people around the world will live in urban areas. So we will see a doubling of urban population from 3 billion today to 6 billion in 2050. The way we think about cities and the way we build cities from a sustainability perspective, so resource intensive, high carbon intensive, or resource efficient and high carbon efficient, is absolutely crucial. We need to think about how to manage this huge and accelerating urbanization shift during the next 2-3 decades towards a sustainable development pattern. And this is something which my generation is responsible for and your generation is responsible for. So please think about sustainable cities. And we will also see that cities will gain much more importance as global actors in international arenas. I'm sure that beyond the role of cities today in their nation states, cities will become very important global actors, because economic activities and innovation activities and investments and education will be accumulated in a group of 50 to 100 cities around the world. So these cities will play a completely different role compared with the current political system in which nation states are the major actors. Cities will become very important actors. Please think about sustainable cities and the new role of cities in global governance processes. My ninth issue area, my ninth point, which I would like to focus on when it comes to the global challenges and global development arenas in the 21st century, is about fragility of countries, fragility of cities, conflict, war, and poverty, because these issues will be interrelated. Currently, 1.5 billion people are living in fragile contexts, and there are no easy solutions. But we need to think about that, of course, and we can do a lot, although there are no easy solutions. One of these things which can be done are the following. We can invest in regions which are fragile, like Northern Africa, currently the MENA region. We can and we need to invest in the still stable countries around the fragility countries to prevent conflict diffusion in whole regions. So now we need to invest in Tunisia. Now we need to invest in Lebanon. Now we need to think about a stable Jordan. We need to invest big scale in these countries to prevent a diffusion of fragility in whole regions. In fragile countries, we can invest in actors which move into the right direction. We can cooperate with democratic organizations. We can organize human rights protection. And in our own countries, we need to organize liberal refugee rules and laws. This is very important. This has to do with our responsibility as rich countries to manage global challenges like refugee development processes. So fragility is a difficult challenge, but many things could be done. So now I'm coming to my last point. It's point number 10. I think this is something which is very near to your heart, because it is about knowledge and education. And you are all people and young people coming from the knowledge field. You are going to universities. You are going to be important leaders in the field of knowledge creation. So think about knowledge in the field of global development. From my perspective, two aspects are very important here. The first aspect is that joint knowledge creation between countries, different countries, from different cultures, from north and south and east and west, joint knowledge creation is very important to understand joint problems which we are confronting. And this is very important because in the past, northern countries, donor countries, OECD countries, we have been producing the knowledge which has been implemented then in the field of international development cooperation. This is not working any longer. We need to bring our knowledge together from different countries. Joint knowledge creation is important to understand joint problems. The second aspect then is, based on joint knowledge creation, we might have a better chance to organize legitimacy for joint action. So joint knowledge creation is strategic for understanding problems and global challenges, but also for creating legitimacy for joint action to manage global challenges. So please work in global networks. You are already doing this. You are coming together from very different countries from around the world to discuss global issues during the next days to come. This is a prototype of how global cooperation needs to be organized in the future. Knowledge cooperation needs to be one of the basic pillars of international cooperation in the 21st century. But on the other hand side, globalization, of course, also implies huge opportunities for creating a better world in the 21st century at a global scale. More countries are participating. More cultures are becoming important. So this is a fantastic chance also to create what I talked at the beginning of my reflections, a world citizenship, and you will be the first generation creating this global citizenship. I wish you a very successful conference.